The abandoned gas station's flickering lights cast eerie shadows across the rain-soaked parking lot. Former Detective James Calloway stood motionless, the coffee cup slipping from his fingers and shattering on the concrete. Through the downpour, he stared at the emaciated canine huddled beside a dumpster, those unmistakable amber eyes meeting his across the distance. It was impossible, yet undeniable. His partner, the decorated canine officer who had saved his life multiple times, was now a skeletal shadow of himself, filthy and forgotten. How had Shadow, the department's most decorated police dog, ended up discarded like garbage? And who would pay for this betrayal? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The night had begun like any other in James Calloway's new routine, grabbing coffee at the 24-hour gas station before heading to his overnight security shift. 3 years into civilian life, after 15 years with the Metro Police Department, he had settled into the quiet monotony that helped keep the nightmares at bay. The rain had been relentless for hours, turning the city into a maze of reflective surfaces and blurred lights. James had just paid for his coffee when movement near the dumpsters caught his eye. Likely another stray seeking shelter from the downpour. He'd taken to carrying dog treats in his jacket pocket for such encounters, a habit formed from years working with canine units. But as he approached, something about this particular animal made his breath catch in his throat. The dog was severely malnourished, ribs protruding beneath a filthy, matted coat. It cowered as James drew nearer, yet there was something in its posture, a dignity that hadn't been completely extinguished by whatever hardships it had endured. When the dog finally looked up, James's coffee slipped from his grasp, the ceramic shattering against the asphalt. Those eyes, amber, intelligent, with a distinct dark pattern around the right iris, a genetic quirk so unique it had been noted in Shadow's official records. Shadow, his partner for 6 years. Shadow, who had tracked down missing children, detected explosives that would have claimed dozens of lives, and once thrown himself between James and a knife-wielding assailant, taking a wound that had left a distinctive scar across his left shoulder. "Shadow," James whispered, his voice barely audible above the drumming rain. The dog's ears twitched. There was a moment of stillness before a low whine emerged from the animal's throat. His tail, once powerful enough to bruise James's leg, when wagging with excitement, gave a feeble thump against the wet ground. James dropped to his knees, heedless of the puddles soaking through his uniform pants. "My God, Shadow, what happened to you, boy?" As he reached out, a sharp voice cut through the rain. "Hey, leave my dog alone!" James looked up to see an elderly man shuffling toward them, wielding an umbrella like a weapon. He wore layers of threadbare clothing, his face weathered and suspicious beneath a sodden baseball cap. "Your dog?" James stood slowly, aware of the imposing figure he presented in his security uniform. "Sir, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. This dog—" "I found him wandering by the interstate 3 months ago," the man interrupted defensively. "Nobody wanted him. Nobody looked for him. I've been sharing what little I've got." He patted his pocket, revealing the corner of a fast food bag. "He's mine now." James struggled to contain the emotions surging through him. Confusion, outrage, heartbreak. Shadow had been missing for nearly 8 months, ever since James had been forced to retire early after an injury. The department had told him Shadow had been honorably discharged and placed with a suitable family through their K-9 retirement program. "Sir," James began carefully, "this dog is Shadow. He was my partner in the Metro PD K-9 unit for 6 years. He's microchipped, professionally trained, and according to the department, was supposed to be living with an adoptive family." He gestured to the dog's condition. "Not starving on the streets." The old man's grip tightened on his makeshift leash, a frayed rope tied to Shadow's worn collar. "You got proof he's yours?" James reached for his wallet, extracting a laminated photo that had never left his possession. Shadow and himself, in formal police attire after receiving a commendation for bravery. "This is us, and if you look at his left shoulder under all that matted fur, you'll find a scar from a knife wound he took protecting me." Doubt crept into the old man's expression as he glanced between the photo and the dog. Shadow, who had remained frozen during their exchange, now took a tentative step toward James, his nose working overtime despite his weakened state. "He recognizes me," James said softly. "Please just let me check his shoulder." After a long, tense moment, the old man lowered his umbrella. "Fine, but I'm watching you." James approached Shadow slowly, murmuring the command phrases that had once been part of their daily communication. "Easy, Shadow, stand check." To his amazement, despite his condition, Shadow responded, shifting his weight and allowing James to part the matted fur along his shoulder. There it was, the 4-inch scar, still visible through the grime and neglect. "See?" James said, emotion making his voice rough. "This is my partner." The old man's hostility diminished, replaced by something like resignation. He never did act like a regular stray, always looking down the road like he was waiting for someone. He sighed, raindrops dripping from his cap. "I didn't steal him, mister. Found him half dead already. Been doing my best with what I got." "I believe you," James assured him, noting the genuine concern in the man's eyes despite his circumstances. "But I need to know how he ended up on the streets. He was supposed to be taken care of. There's a whole program for retired police." "Dogs. Don't know nothing about that," the man replied. "Just know I found him limping along the guardrail out by the industrial district. No collar, except that police one with his tags missing." James felt a cold anger solidifying in his chest, an investigator's instinct awakening after years of dormancy. Shadow hadn't simply wandered off from some loving retirement home. Something had gone very wrong, and someone was responsible. "Sir, you've been taking care of him when no one else would, and I'm grateful for that," James said, reaching for his wallet again. "I'd like to compensate you." "Don't need your money," the man cut in, though his eyes betrayed how desperately he did. "Just need to know he'll be okay. He's a good dog, smart, deserves better than dumpster scraps." James nodded, understanding the pride that kept the man from accepting what might feel like charity. "How about this? I could use your help. As a witness. If you'll tell me exactly where you found Shadow and any details you remember, it would help me figure out what happened to him, and I'd compensate you for your time and information." This approach seemed to work. The man nodded slowly. "Got a pen? I'll draw you a map. Got a good memory for places." As the old man sketched a crude map on the back of a receipt, James knelt beside Shadow again, running his hands gently over the once powerful frame, cataloguing the signs of neglect and possible abuse. Beyond the malnourishment, there were newer scars James didn't recognize, and Shadow's back left leg trembled constantly, suggesting an untreated injury. "I'm going to find out who did this to you, boy," he whispered, his throat tight with emotion, "and I'm going to make it right. I promise." What James didn't yet realize was that Shadow's condition wasn't the result of simple neglect or an adoption. Gone wrong, the trail he was about to follow would lead him into a darkness that lurked within the very system he had served faithfully for 15 years, a discovery that would test his courage, integrity, and the unbreakable bond between a handler and his canine partner. As the rain continued to fall around them, washing away the surface grime of the city, James made a silent vow that the truth would not remain buried. For Shadow, and for every dog who had served only to be betrayed, there would be justice. No matter what it cost him. James secured the tattered map from the old man, who introduced himself simply as Earl, and carefully approached Shadow once more. Despite his emaciated condition, the dog's training surfaced through years of neglect. He responded to the subtle hand signals that had once been their silent language in tense situations. "Come, Shadow," James said softly, the command gentle, but firm. Shadow hesitated, glancing between James and Earl. The old man nodded, his weather-beaten face softening. "Go on, boy. This is what you've been waiting for." With visible effort, Shadow rose on trembling legs and took a halting step toward James. Then another. Each movement seemed to cost him precious energy, but his amber eyes never left James's face. When he finally reached his former handler, James knelt and gently wrapped his arms around the dog, feeling every rib beneath his fingers. "I've got an emergency vet about 15 minutes from here," James told Earl. "I need to get him medical attention right away. Would you be willing to come with us? I still have questions, and your witness statement could be important." Earl shifted uncomfortably, eyeing James's security uniform with lingering suspicion. "Not big on official statements. Got my own reasons to avoid paperwork." James understood immediately. Many of the city's homeless had learned to stay invisible to authorities. "This isn't official, no paperwork, just you telling me what you know, man to man." After a moment's consideration, Earl nodded. "For the dog's sake, but I ain't riding, in no patrol car." "It's just my personal vehicle," James assured him, carefully lifting Shadow, shocked at how little the once powerful dog weighed. "And I appreciate this more than you know." The rain had subsided to a steady drizzle as they made their way to James's battered Ford Explorer, parked at the edge of the lot. James arranged his jacket in the back seat to create a makeshift bed for Shadow, while Earl reluctantly climbed into the passenger seat, clutching his few possessions in a plastic bag. "Been a long time since I rode in anything besides the bus," Earl commented as James started the engine. "Your dog there, he's special, ain't he? Not just any police dog." James glanced in the rearview mirror at Shadow, who had settled into an exhausted stillness. Shadow was exceptional. 4 commendations for bravery, over 60 successful search and rescue operations. He could detect explosives so effectively that the FBI borrowed him twice for high-profile cases. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Figured as much," Earl nodded. "Way he carries himself, even half-starved, kept his dignity. Wouldn't take food unless I offered it proper-like, no scavenging like regular strays." As they drove through the rain-slicked streets toward the all-night veterinary hospital, Earl gradually shared what he knew. He'd found Shadow near an industrial storage facility on the outskirts of the city, his police collar still present, but the identification tags removed. The dog had been limping badly, already thin but not yet emaciated, suggesting he hadn't been on the streets long at that point. "There's something else," Earl added, hesitation in his voice. "Night I found him, saw a vehicle driving away. One of them big black SUVs with the tinted windows, private security type. Didn't think much of it then, but the way that dog was dumped." James's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Private security firms often contracted with city departments, including police. The connection sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with his rain-soaked clothes. "Would you recognize the vehicle if you saw it again? Any logos or markings?" Earl shook his head. "Too dark, but it had one of them license plates, you know, the kind government contractors get, with the special numbers." James filed this information away, the detective in him awakening after years of dormancy. Shadow's condition wasn't the result of him escaping from a loving retirement home. Someone had deliberately abandoned him in an industrial area rarely frequented by the general public, a place where a dog would likely die before being discovered. They arrived at the emergency veterinary clinic, a modern building with bright lights illuminating the parking lot. James carried Shadow inside, the dog's head resting weakly against his shoulder, in a gesture so familiar it made his throat tighten. The front desk attendant took one look at Shadow's condition and immediately called for a veterinarian. Within minutes, they were ushered into an examination room where Dr. Meera Patel, a young woman with kind eyes and efficient movements, began assessing Shadow's condition. "How long has he been like this?" she asked, gently palpating Shadow's abdomen. "I just found him tonight," James explained. "He's been missing for approximately 8 months. He's a retired police K9, my partner." Dr. Patel's eyes widened slightly. "This is a police dog? He should have been in the retirement program." She checked Shadow's mouth and ears with practiced movements. "He's severely malnourished, has a significant untreated injury to his left hind leg, and shows signs of multiple untreated infections. I'm also concerned about these newer scars. They're consistent with dogfighting injuries." James felt as though he'd been struck. Dogfighting! Shadow was a trained police K9. He wouldn't— "Not as a fighter," Dr. Patel clarified grimly. "Sometimes these operations use police-trained dogs as bait to train their fighters. The discipline makes them predictable targets." She met James's horrified gaze directly. "I'm sorry to be blunt, but you needed to know. I've treated other retired service dogs who ended up in similar situations." The examination room seemed to close in around James as the implications sank in. Shadow hadn't just been abandoned. He'd been deliberately sold or given to people who would exploit his training in the cruelest way imaginable. And yet, he had somehow escaped or been discarded when he no longer served their purpose. "Can you save him?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Patel's expression softened. "He's in rough shape, but police dogs are bred for resilience. I need to run some tests, start him on IV fluids and antibiotics, and assess whether that leg needs surgery. It won't be cheap," she added gently. "Money isn't an issue," James stated firmly. In truth, his security job barely covered his modest apartment and basic needs, but he would sell everything he owned, if necessary. "Do whatever it takes." As Dr. Patel and a technician prepared to take Shadow for treatment, James knelt beside the examination table. Shadow's eyes, though clouded with pain and exhaustion, focused on him with the same trust they had shown during countless dangerous operations. "I'll be right here, partner," James promised, gently scratching behind Shadow's ears in the way that had always comforted him. "You focus on getting stronger. I'll handle the rest." After Shadow was wheeled away, James returned to the waiting room, where Earl sat uncomfortably, looking out of place among the worried pet owners with their carriers and leashes. "Your dog gonna make it?" Earl asked as James sank into the chair beside him. "He's a fighter," James replied, hoping his confidence wasn't misplaced. "But someone is going to answer for what happened to him." Earl studied him for a long moment. "You ain't just security, are you? The way you talk, the way you move, you were real police." James nodded. "Detective, 15 years with Metro PD, forced into early retirement after an injury. Shadow was supposed to retire with me, but the department claimed their policies had changed. Said he needed to go to a special facility first, then would be placed with a suitable family." His expression darkened. "Obviously, that's not what happened." "You gonna go after them? The police?" Earl asked, genuine concern in his voice. "That's a hard road, man. Power protects power." "I'm going after whoever's responsible," James confirmed. "Whether it's an individual or the entire system, Shadow deserves justice, and so do any other K9s who might have suffered the same fate." Earl nodded slowly, seemingly coming to a decision. From his tattered coat he withdrew a small flip phone. "Got something to show you. Night I found your dog. Took a picture of where he was dumped. Thought maybe I'd see a reward poster someday. Never did." He handed James the phone, navigating to a grainy image showing the industrial area dimly lit by distant security lights. In the foreground lay Shadow, barely visible except for the reflective strip on his police collar. "This is exactly where you found him?" James asked, studying the background details. "Exact spot. That building there, it's got cameras." Earl pointed to a warehouse visible in the distance. "Security company uses it for storage. Thornfield Solutions, I think the sign says." James froze. Thornfield Solutions was one of the largest private security contractors in the region, with connections to multiple law enforcement agencies, including K-9 training facilities. The pieces were beginning to align in a pattern that sent ice through his veins. "Earl," James said carefully, "this information could be crucial. Would you be willing to show me this location tomorrow? I need to see it firsthand." The old man hesitated. "People like me. We stay away from places with cameras for good reason." "I understand," James assured him. "You've already done more than enough. Can I at least copy this photo?" Earl shrugged. "Keep the phone. Got it from a charity giveaway last year. Battery's dying anyway." He stood, gathering his few possessions. "Hope your dog pulls through. He's one of the good ones." "So are you," James replied sincerely. "Let me give you something for your help." He reached for his wallet, but Earl waved him off. "Nah, just do right by that dog. That's payment enough." He paused at the clinic door. "But if you're really going after whoever did this, watch your back. Dogs ain't the only ones who get put down when they become inconvenient." With that warning hanging in the air, Earl disappeared into the night, leaving James alone with a dying phone, a grainy photograph, and the first thread of what promised to be a dangerous investigation. As the hours of waiting stretched before him, James scrolled through his contacts, stopping at a name he hadn't called in 3 years. Michael Reeves, his former partner in the detective division. If anyone could help him navigate the murky waters ahead without drawing unwanted attention, it would be Mike, assuming he was still willing to associate with the man whose testimony had created a departmental scandal before his retirement. James took a deep breath and pressed call, knowing that from this moment forward there would be no turning back. For Shadow, he would revisit the darkest chapter of his law enforcement career and potentially uncover something even worse. The call to Michael Reeves went to voicemail. James left a brief message, deliberately vague, mentioning only that he needed guidance on a personal matter involving department resources. He knew better than to reveal more over an unsecured line. 3 years away from police work had taught him caution, especially when dealing with potentially corrupted systems. Dawn broke over the city as James sat in the sterile waiting room, nursing his 4th cup of vending machine coffee. His security uniform, still damp from the rain, clung uncomfortably to his skin, but he barely noticed. His mind was occupied with reconstructing the timeline of Shadow's disappearance, searching for connections and inconsistencies. The double doors to the treatment area swung open as Dr. Patel emerged, dark circles under her eyes betraying the long night's work. James stood immediately, reading her expression for any sign of Shadow's condition. "He's stabilized," she said, offering a tired smile. "Touch and go for a while, but he's responding well to fluids and antibiotics. We've cleaned his wounds, treated the infections, and put a temporary brace on his leg. He'll need surgery for a proper repair, but he's too weak right now." Relief flooded through James, so intense he had to grip the chair to steady himself. "When can I see him?" "He's resting now, but you can have a few minutes with him. We've got him in the recovery ward." She hesitated. "Mr. Calloway, I need to discuss something with you privately." James followed her to a small office, adjacent to the treatment area, apprehension building with each step. Dr. Patel closed the door and gestured for him to sit. "During our examination, we found something unusual," she began, pulling up images. On her computer, Shadow is microchipped, as all police canines are. But when we scanned it, we discovered it's not the original department chip. James leaned forward. What do you mean? K9 units have specialized microchips with secure information, handler details, training certifications, medical history. Shadow's original chip has been surgically removed and replaced with a standard pet microchip, registered to a company called Elite K9 Solutions. The name sent a jolt through James. Elite K9 Solutions was a subsidiary of Thornfield, the same company whose warehouse appeared in Earl's photograph. That can't be coincidence, James muttered. Does the chip data show when it was implanted? Dr. Patel nodded. About 7 months ago, registered by someone named Victor Mercer. James committed the name to memory. Doctor, I need copies of all this information. Shadow's condition isn't an accident or neglect case, it's evidence. She studied him with newfound understanding. You're investigating this. I am, James confirmed, and I need to ask a favor that goes beyond veterinary care. Shadow needs protection. If the people who did this discover he's been found... He didn't need to finish the thought. Dr. Patel's expression hardened with professional resolve. We have security protocols for abuse cases, she assured him. I'll register him under a different name in our system. Only my team will know his true identity. And I know a technician who used to work with police dogs. She can stay with him when medical staff can't be present. James felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you. I can't emphasize enough how important this is. I understand. Dr. Patel replied simply, I've seen too many animals suffer from human cruelty. If you're trying to stop whatever led to this, I want to help. After reviewing Shadow's treatment plan and arranging payment, wincing inwardly at the cost while outwardly insisting money was no object, James was finally allowed to see his partner. The recovery ward was quiet, except for the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. Shadow lay on a padded bed, multiple IV lines running into his front leg. His coat had been shaved in several places to treat wounds, making him look even more vulnerable. Despite his sedation, Shadow's ears perked slightly as James approached, his tail offering a weak thump of recognition. Hey, partner, James whispered, gently stroking the dog's head. You're safe now? No one's going to hurt you again? Shadow's eyes clouded with medication but still alert, fixed on James with absolute trust. In that moment, James felt the full weight of his responsibility, not just to heal Shadow's physical wounds, but to uncover the truth and hold accountable those who had betrayed that trust. Rest now, he told Shadow. I've got work to do. Leaving the clinic with assurances he would return that evening, James drove to his small apartment on the city's east side. The modest one-bedroom unit had never felt particularly like home, but now it would become the base of operations for his investigation. After a quick shower and change of clothes, he called his supervisor at the security company to request emergency personal leave. The explanation, finding his former K9 partner injured and abandoned, wasn't entirely truthful in its implications, but it earned him a week's unpaid leave without further questions. Next, he cleared the small kitchen table and began transforming it into an investigation board. His training as a detective had instilled habits that never quite disappeared. Within an hour, he had created a detailed timeline, beginning with his injury 3 years ago, followed by his forced retirement, and Shadow's supposed entry into the department's retirement program. His phone rang as he worked. Michael Reeves, returning his call. James, it's been a while. Got your message. What's going on? James took a deep breath. Mike, I found Shadow last night. A long pause followed. Your Shadow? The department said he was placed with a family in the suburbs. The department lied, James replied flatly. I found him half-starved near an industrial district. He's been abused, Mike, used in dogfighting. Someone surgically removed his department chip and replaced it with one registered to Elite Canine Solutions. Another pause, longer this time. When Mike spoke again, his voice had dropped to near a whisper. "James, where are you calling from?" "My apartment." "Why?" "Don't say anything else. I'm coming over. 1 hour." The line went dead before James could respond. The caution in Mike's voice sent a chill through him. His former partner had always been the steady one, rarely rattled by even the most dangerous situations. If he was exercising this level of caution, the implications were troubling. While waiting, James continued assembling his evidence board. He printed Earl's photograph, noted the exact location of the industrial complex, and mapped the connections between Elite Canine Solutions and Thornfield. A quick internet search revealed that Victor Mercer, the name on Shadow's new microchip, was listed as Elite's Canine Acquisition Specialist, whatever that euphemism might conceal. Precisely 1 hour after the call, a knock came at his door. James checked the peephole to confirm it was indeed Michael Reeves before disengaging the locks. His former partner looked much the same, broad-shouldered and solid, with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. His hair had more grey now, and new lines creased his face, but the handshake he offered was as firm as ever. "Good to see you, James," Mike said, genuine warmth in his voice despite the circumstances. Then his expression turned serious. "Let me check something before we talk." Without further explanation, he pulled out a small electronic device and began sweeping the apartment methodically. James recognized it immediately, a counter-surveillance tool used by the department's Special Investigations Unit. "Standard procedure now," Mike explained, noting James's raised eyebrow. "Ever since the corruption hearings. You never know who might be listening." The device remained silent as Mike completed his sweep. Apparently satisfied, he pocketed it and turned his attention to the investigation board James had created. "Always the methodical one," he remarked, studying the timeline. "Now tell me everything, from the beginning." James recounted the previous night's events in detail, finding Shadow, meeting Earl, discovering the connection to Thornfield and Elite Canine Solutions. Mike listened without interruption, his expression growing steadily grimmer. "This confirms something we've suspected but couldn't prove," he said when James finished. "Over the past 2 years, at least 6 retired police dogs have supposedly been placed through the department's program, but when we tried to follow up for a human interest story, all the contact information led nowhere. Dead ends." "You were investigating this?" James asked, surprised. Mike shook his head. "Not officially. After what happened with your testimony about evidence tampering, I started paying closer attention to departmental blind spots. The K9 retirement program fell under new management around the same time you left. Everything on paper looks perfect, but there's no actual oversight, no follow-up visits, no verification." He studied the photograph of the industrial complex. "Thornfield provides security for half the corporate buildings downtown, plus 3 government facilities. They also secured that exclusive contract for specialized training resources for the department last year. Including K9 training," James added, the pieces aligning with disturbing clarity. "Exactly. They built that new training facility, out by the county line, state-of-the-art, but completely closed to outside observation, even to most department personnel. Proprietary methods, they claim." James felt the familiar cold focus that had made him an effective detective settling over him. "So we have a private security corporation with deep ties to the department, a subsidiary that's somehow acquiring retired police dogs and at least 1 confirmed case of abuse and abandonment. What we don't have is proof of systematic wrongdoing, or who's authorizing it." Mike's expression darkened. There's another piece you should know about. After the last budget cuts, the department quietly outsourced parts of the K9 program to save money. Training, specialized equipment, even veterinary care now goes through approved contractors. Let me guess, James said grimly. Thornfield and its subsidiaries. Mike nodded. It's a closed system. They provide the dogs, train them, maintain them, and apparently dispose of them when they're no longer useful. The clinical terminology made James's stomach turn. Shadow wasn't disposed of. He was exploited, abused, and left to die. I believe you, Mike assured him. But proving it, proving a systematic problem rather than a one-off case of someone cutting corners, that's going to be nearly impossible without inside access. James studied the board, his mind already formulating approaches. Then we need to get inside, starting with that industrial complex where Shadow was abandoned. Mike looked at him sharply. James, this isn't like before. You're not a detective anymore. You don't have a badge, resources, or protection. If Thornfield is doing what we suspect, they won't hesitate to eliminate problems. I don't have a choice, Mike, James replied quietly. Shadow never abandoned me, even when it almost cost him his life. I won't abandon him or any other dog suffering the same fate. A complex emotion crossed Mike's face. Respect mingled with concern. I figured you'd say that, which is why I brought this. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small USB drive. Department access codes, security protocols for the past month, and the maintenance schedule for the industrial district surveillance systems. If you're going in there, at least you won't be going in blind. James accepted the drive, recognizing the risk Mike was taking by providing this information. Why help me? This could cost you your pension if anyone finds out. Mike's expression hardened. Because what happened to you 3 years ago was wrong. The department sacrificed a good detective to protect a broken system. I stood by and let it happen. He gestured to the evidence board. I'm not standing by this time. As Mike prepared to leave, having stayed longer than was prudent, he paused at the door. Be careful, James. Start with Mercer, the acquisition specialist, but watch your approach. If this goes as deep as I suspect, you're poking a hornet's nest. After Mike departed, James returned to his investigation board with renewed purpose. What had begun as a mission to understand Shadow's suffering had evolved into something larger, exposing a system that treated loyal service animals as disposable commodities. The scope was daunting, the opponents powerful, but for the first time in 3 years, James felt the fog of purposelessness lifting. In its place stood clear resolve. Justice for Shadow would mean justice for all. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of James's apartment as he reviewed the information Mike had provided. The USB drive contained more than just access. Codes. It included personnel files for key figures in the K9 program, including Victor Mercer, the man whose name appeared on Shadow's replacement microchip. Mercer's file painted an interesting picture. Former military dog handler, dishonorable discharge under circumstances that had been carefully redacted, followed by a series of short-term positions with private security firms before landing at Elite K9 Solutions 3 years ago. His department clearance had been approved by Captain Edward Westfield, the administrative officer who had also overseen James's forced retirement. Another connection, James muttered, adding this detail to his growing evidence board. According to the maintenance schedule Mike had provided, the security cameras at the industrial complex would be offline for system updates between 2 and 4 p.m. that day. A perfect window for reconnaissance without detection. James would need to move quickly to use this opportunity. First, though, he needed to check on Shadow. He called the veterinary clinic, and was relieved to learn that his partner had made it through the night without complications and was showing modest improvement. Dr. Patel had arranged for him to be moved to a more secure room at the back of the facility, accessible only to authorized staff. He ate a small amount this morning, the technician informed him. Dr. Patel says that's an excellent sign. After the call, James turned his attention to planning the day's investigation. He couldn't risk approaching Mercer directly, not yet. Instead, he would focus on gathering evidence from the scene where Shadow had been abandoned. The industrial complex was his starting point, but he would need a pretext for being there during business hours. James dug through his closet, finding the clipboard and high-visibility vest he'd used during his time as a detective. With his security uniform and a confident demeanor, he could easily pass as someone conducting a routine inspection. He added a hard hat from his current security job to complete the disguise. Before leaving, he secured his apartment carefully, mindful of Mike's caution. He stashed copies of his evidence and notes in a waterproof container hidden in the apartment's air vent, a habit from his days investigating organized crime. If something happened to him, Mike would know where to look. The industrial district sprawled across the city's southwest edge, a maze of warehouses, storage facilities, and distribution centers connected by chain-link fences and asphalt roads. James located the area from Earl's photograph without difficulty, a loading zone behind a large warehouse with Thornfield's logo displayed prominently near the entrance. He parked his Explorer 2 blocks away and approached on foot, clipboard in hand, vest and hard hat establishing his visual authority. The few workers he passed barely gave him a second glance, conditioned to ignore maintenance and inspection. Personnel. The exact spot where Earl had found Shadow was marked by nothing special, just a patch of gravel near a dumpster enclosure, out of sight of the main access road. James pretended to inspect junction boxes while surveying the area. Security cameras were mounted at strategic points around the perimeter, all currently powered down for maintenance as scheduled. What caught his attention wasn't immediately visible. It was the absence of something. Despite being a loading area, there were no exterior lights illuminating this particular section, creating a perfect blind spot for activities meant to remain unobserved, deliberate, not accidental. James made notes on his clipboard, maintaining his cover while documenting the scene. As he worked, a large delivery truck turned into the complex, heading toward the loading docks on the opposite side of the building. Through a coincidence of timing, the truck slowed near his position, its air brakes hissing as it navigated the turn. The sound caught James's attention, but it was the company logo on the truck's side that made him freeze momentarily. Elite Transport Services, another Thornfield subsidiary. More interesting was what he glimpsed through the truck's partially open rear door as it passed. The unmistakable metal framework of dog cages. James kept his expression neutral while his mind raced. Elite Transport Services shouldn't be carrying animal transport equipment. Their published business was secure, document and equipment transport for government contracts. He needed to see where that truck was going, maintaining an unhurried pace that wouldn't attract attention. James followed the delivery truck's path around the building to a secondary loading dock. Unlike the main warehouse entrance with its Thornfield signage, this area was unmarked and secured with keypad access doors. The truck backed up to the dock, and two men in elite transport uniforms quickly unloaded several large crates and what appeared to be specialized equipment. James approached casually, clipboard raised as if checking items on a list. "Afternoon," he called to the workers. "Need to verify this delivery against the maintenance schedule. System updates today." One worker barely looked up, but the other eyed him suspiciously. "Don't remember seeing inspection scheduled." James smiled easily, projecting the confident authority that had served him well as a detective. "Last-minute addition after the system failure last week. Just need to confirm what's coming in so we don't overload during reboot." The suspicious worker hesitated, then shrugged. "Talk to Mercer inside. He handles all this." James felt a surge of adrenaline at the name. Victor Mercer was here right now. This coincidence was too valuable to waste, despite the risk of direct contact. "Will do. Which door?" "Security entrance on the side. If he's not there, try the processing room." James nodded his thanks and moved toward the indicated entrance, mind racing. He hadn't planned for direct confrontation with Mercer today. This was supposed to be purely reconnaissance. But circumstances had presented an opportunity he couldn't ignore. The side entrance required an access code, but thanks to Mike's USB drive, James had the weekly maintenance override, 4295. He punched it in with confidence, and the door unlocked with a satisfying click. Inside, the facility bore little resemblance to a standard warehouse. The space had been partitioned into specialized areas, with what appeared to be veterinary equipment visible through several doorways. Most disturbing was the distinct sound of dogs, not the chaotic barking of a kennel, but the disciplined, controlled responses of working animals. James moved purposefully through the corridor, clipboard still in hand. A doorway ahead opened, and a tall man in a polo shirt embroidered with the Elite Canine Solutions logo emerged, studying a tablet. He looked up as James approached, his expression immediately suspicious. "Who are you? This area is restricted during intake." James recognized him instantly from the personnel file, Victor Mercer. In person, he projected the cold efficiency his military record suggested. A man who viewed animals as tools, not partners. "Building inspection," James replied smoothly. "System maintenance requires verification of all electrical usage in this wing." Mercer's eyes narrowed. "I wasn't notified of any inspection." "That's why I'm here," James countered, maintaining eye contact. "Communication breakdown between departments. Again." Something in his tone, the familiar frustration with bureaucratic inefficiency, seemed to resonate with Mercer, whose posture relaxed slightly. "Fine, but make it quick. We have sensitive operations today." "Just need to check the main junction in the processing room," James pressed, seizing the opening. "Should only take a minute." Mercer hesitated, then gestured impatiently. "Down. The hall, third door. Don't touch anything but the electrical panel." James nodded and walked confidently in the indicated direction, aware of Mercer watching him. The processing room turned out to be a clinical space with examination tables, medical equipment, and a row of specialized transport kennels. The room was empty of animals at the moment, but evidence of recent use was apparent. Fur on the tables, disinfectant smell lingering in the air. As he pretended to inspect the electrical panel, James took mental photographs of everything he could see. On a whiteboard across the room, a schedule listed K9 units by identification number, with names of handlers, departments, and status designations. Several were marked retirement pending, with dates within the coming month. A binder on a nearby desk caught his attention. K9 Reallocation Protocol. James glanced over his shoulder to ensure he was still alone, then quickly flipped it open. What he found turned his blood cold. The document outlined a systematic process for evaluating retiring police dogs based on factors including age, physical condition, and behavioral characteristics. Each animal was assigned a category determining its secondary usage potential. Category A, breeding program candidates. Category B, private security placement. Category C, training resources. Category D, depreciated assets. Terminal protocol. Shadow's identification number appeared on a processed list. Initially marked as Category B, but later downgraded to C, with a notation: aggressive resistance to reprogramming, handler fixation, persists. The clinical language couldn't disguise the horror of what James was reading. Training resources was a euphemism for dogs used to train fighting animals, exactly what Dr. Patel had suspected from Shadow's injuries. and terminal protocol required no interpretation. The sound of approaching voices galvanized James into action. He quickly photographed several pages with his phone, closed the binder, and returned to the electrical panel just as Mercer reappeared with another man, older, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Inspection's taking longer than expected," the older man observed, his tone making it clear it wasn't a casual comment. "Just finishing up," James replied, closing the panel and making a final note on his clipboard. "Everything checks out." As he turned to leave, the older man stepped forward, hand extended. "Don't believe we've met, Richard Thornfield, Chief Executive." The name hit James like a physical blow. Richard Thornfield, founder of the corporation and a major political donor with connections throughout city government, known for his philanthropic contributions to first responder programs, including the K9 unit. "Tom Wilson, Systems Inspection," James responded, accepting the handshake with a calm he didn't feel. "Just doing the rounds before the quarterly audit." Thornfield's grip was firm, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Thoroughness is appreciated, Mr. Wilson. Security is our business after all." Something in his gaze suggested more than casual interest, an assessment, as if cataloguing James's features for future reference. Had his cover already been compromised? "If you're finished here, Mercer will show you out," Thornfield continued. "Some areas are undergoing specialized maintenance today. Safety protocols, you understand." "Of course," James nodded, understanding he was being politely but firmly removed from the facility. Mercer escorted him toward the exit, maintaining a professional demeanor that nonetheless communicated suspicion. At the door, he paused. "Which division did you say sent you?" "I didn't," James replied easily. "The paperwork's a mess since the system integration got assigned this morning, that's all I know." Mercer seemed about to press further when his radio crackled. Distracted by the call, he simply opened the door, effectively dismissing James from the facility. Once outside, James maintained an unhurried pace until he was well away from the complex, fighting the urge to run. Only when he reached his vehicle did he allow himself to process what he'd discovered. The evidence was worse than he'd imagined. Not isolated cases of neglect or individual corruption, but a systematic program that treated loyal service animals as disposable assets to be exploited for profit. Shadow wasn't an exception. He was one of many victims in an operation that likely extended throughout the region's K9 programs. As he drove away from the industrial district, James contacted Mike using a prepaid phone he'd purchased for the investigation. "I've got documentation," he said without preamble when Mike answered. "Not just Shadow, dozens of dogs processed through the reallocation program. It's organized, systematic, and involves higher levels than we thought." "Including who?" Mike asked, his voice tense. "Richard Thornfield himself. I met him at the facility." A sharp intake of breath came through the line. "That's problematic. Thornfield has connections all the way to the governor's office." "It gets worse," James continued. "They're bringing in more dogs today. The documents show at least 3 K9s from Metro scheduled for retirement this week." The implications hung heavily between them. Dogs, still in active service, with handlers who trusted the department to ensure their partner's well-being after retirement, were about to enter the same system that had nearly killed Shadow. "We need more than documents," Mike said finally. "We need irrefutable evidence that connects the official retirement program to what's happening at that facility, and we need it before those dogs are processed." James thought of Shadow fighting for his life in the veterinary clinic, of the clinical categories in the binder, of the sound of dogs responding to commands in that hidden facility. "I'll get the evidence," he promised, "whatever it takes." What had begun as a personal mission to understand one dog's suffering had expanded into something far more significant: exposing a betrayal that undermined the very foundation of trust between officers, their canine partners, and the systems meant to protect them both. The truth was now clear, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and corporate interests. What remained was to bring that truth into the light, before more loyal partners suffered Shadow's fate. The evening sky darkened as James made his way to the veterinary clinic for his scheduled visit with Shadow. His mind was heavy with the discoveries of the day, but seeing his partner's progress would provide much-needed perspective. This fight wasn't abstract. It had a face, a name, and amber eyes that trusted him completely. Dr. Patel met him at the reception area, her expression cautiously optimistic. "He's doing better than expected," she reported, leading James through the secure door to the treatment areas. "His blood work is showing improvement, and he's keeping food down consistently now. The infection is responding to antibiotics." "What about his leg?" James asked, remembering the constant trembling he'd observed. "That's more complicated," Dr. Patel admitted. "The initial X-rays show an old fracture that healed improperly. We can surgically correct it, but it's going to require specialized orthopedic work. I've consulted with a colleague who specializes in working dog rehabilitation." They reached Shadow's room, where the German Shepherd was resting on a padded bed, noticeably more alert than the previous day. When he spotted James, his tail immediately began to thump against the bedding, and he attempted to raise his head. "Easy, boy," James said softly, moving to kneel beside him. "You're still on the mend." He gently stroked Shadow's head, noting with satisfaction that the dog's eyes seemed clearer, more focused. The IV lines remained, but there were fewer of them now, and the monitoring equipment showed stronger vital signs. "He's fighting hard," Dr. Patel observed. "Police dogs have an incredible will to survive. He knows he has something to live for now." The simple truth of her statement struck James deeply. Shadow had endured unimaginable suffering, yet maintained his dignity, his training, and most remarkably, his capacity to trust. If Shadow could emerge from darkness still believing in humanity's better nature, James could do no less than justify that faith. "There's something else I wanted to discuss," Dr. Patel said, her tone becoming more serious. "When we were treating Shadow, we found evidence of experimental procedures." James's attention sharpened. "What kind of procedures?" "Modifications to standard training reinforcement. There are injection sites consistent with regular administration of behavior-altering compounds, without blood samples from when he was actively receiving them. I can't identify exactly what was used, but the pattern suggests ongoing chemical manipulation." "They were experimenting on him," James said flatly, anger settling cold and hard in his chest. "It appears so," she confirmed. "And based on the healing patterns, this began shortly after his department chip was replaced. There's something else, a small device embedded near his shoulder blade. It's not standard for any K9 program I'm familiar with." "A tracking chip?" James suggested. "More sophisticated. I consulted discreetly with a veterinary technology specialist. It appears to be a modified implant that can deliver timed doses of medication. The reservoir is empty now, which is fortunate. We might not have been able to stabilize him otherwise." This revelation aligned with the reprogramming notation in Shadow's file. They hadn't just physically abused him. They had attempted to chemically override his training and loyalty. The methodical cruelty of it was staggering. "Can you remove it?" James asked. "Once he's stronger. Right now, any additional surgical stress could compromise his recovery." James nodded, continuing to stroke Shadow's head as the dog drifted back into medicated sleep. "I need to ask you for another favor, Doctor." "If it's within my power," she replied cautiously. "I discovered today that more K9s are being processed through this system. at least 3 more this week alone. He met her gaze directly. If I can intercept them, would you be able to provide emergency care and secure housing, temporarily until I can establish a safer, long-term solution? Dr. Patel's expression revealed her internal conflict, professional caution warring with ethical outrage. This facility isn't designed for multiple high-needs cases, especially not security risks, but... She hesitated, then seemed to reach a decision. I have colleagues at the Rural Veterinary Collective. They maintain a rehabilitation farm for service animals, completely private, excellent security, off official networks. Would they help without asking too many questions? They specialize in discretion, Dr. Patel assured him. Many of their patients come from sensitive situations, military working dogs with PTSD, retired service animals from specialized government programs. I can make arrangements, but they'll need some financial commitment. The cost would be substantial. James knew his savings were already strained by Shadow's care, and his unpaid leave meant no income for the foreseeable future. But some prices were non-negotiable. I'll handle it, he promised, already calculating assets he could liquidate. After finalizing visit arrangements for the following day, James left the clinic with renewed determination. In his car, he reviewed the photos he'd taken of the canine reallocation protocol document, focusing on the scheduled retirements for the coming week. 3 dogs were listed for processing the next day. K9 units, Ranger, Cora, and Axel from 3 different jurisdictions. According to the schedule, they would be transported to the Thornfield facility at staggered times throughout the afternoon. Intercepting them directly would be nearly impossible without triggering immediate alarms. James needed another approach. One that would allow him to document the connection between the official retirement program and Thornfield's operation, while potentially saving these dogs from Shadow's fate. He called Mike from the secure phone. I need to know who handles the actual transport for retiring K9s, James said when his former partner answered. Not on paper, but physically. Who picks up the dogs from their handlers or stations? That's outsourced now, Mike replied. Part of the budget cuts. Department uses a contracted transport service for all equipment transfers between facilities. Elite Transport Services? James guessed. That's the one. They handle sensitive department transfers of all kinds, evidence, equipment, and apparently K9s. Why? I saw their truck at Thornfield today. They're scheduled to pick up 3 dogs tomorrow for retirement processing. James explained his developing plan, not to intercept the dogs directly, but to document the entire chain of custody from department to Thornfield facility. That's risky, Mike cautioned. Elite's vehicles are equipped with GPS tracking and security cameras. You won't be able to approach without being identified. I don't need to approach, James clarified. I just need to document the transfer points and establish the connection. If we can prove that dogs surrendered to the official retirement program are being directly delivered to Thornfield's facility, that's our first solid evidence of departmental involvement. Mike was silent for a moment. I can get you the pickup schedule and locations, but James, surveillance alone won't be enough. We need someone with credibility to testify about what happens once those dogs arrive at the facility. I'm working on that angle too, James assured him, though in truth he hadn't yet figured out how to obtain insider testimony. After ending the call, James drove to a shopping center parking lot and systematically checked his vehicle for tracking devices, another habit from his detective days. Finding nothing suspicious, he proceeded to his next stop, a storage facility across town, where he maintained a unit under a different name. The climate-controlled space contained items he hadn't accessed in 3 years, backup investigation equipment, surveillance gear, and most importantly, financial resources not connected to his primary accounts. James had established these contingencies. during a case involving corrupt officers who had attempted to frame him, a situation that had taught him the value of preparation for worst-case scenarios. Among the items he retrieved was a heat signature drone with enhanced camera capabilities, equipment that had once been cutting-edge for police work but was now available commercially. It would allow him to monitor transport vehicles without direct approach. He also collected a substantial cash reserve and credentials for an alias he had maintained, resources he had hoped never to need again, but had preserved nonetheless. As he organized these materials, James's phone rang, not his regular cell or the prepaid, but an older model he kept for personal contacts. The screen displayed a name that momentarily froze him: Sarah Calloway, his ex-wife. They had separated. Shortly after his forced retirement, the strain of his injury, career implosion, and subsequent depression proving too much for a marriage already stressed by the demands of police work. Their parting had been amicable but final, contact between them minimal over the past 3 years. James hesitated before answering. "Sarah?" "James." Her voice was familiar yet distant. "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." "No, it's fine. Just surprised to hear from you." A pause then. "I saw Mike yesterday. He mentioned you'd found Shadow." "Of course." Sarah and Mike's wife, Elena, had remained friends after the divorce. The connection hadn't occurred to him. "Yes," James confirmed. "He's in rough shape, but receiving treatment." "I'm glad." Her tone suggested genuine relief. "I know what he meant to you." Another pause, this one weighted with unspoken history. Shadow had been part of their household for years, a constant presence through the ups and downs of their marriage. Sarah had been the one who insisted Shadow should retire with James after his injury, a battle they had ultimately lost. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "The reason I'm calling. I work at City General now, in administration. We recently contracted with Thornfield Solutions for security upgrades." James's attention sharpened immediately. "When did this happen?" "Last month. But here's what's interesting. They've installed security features well beyond our specifications, including restricted access areas in the sub-basement where our old records are stored. When I questioned the necessity, I was told it came as a municipal security package, approved directly by the mayor's office. The implications were significant. Thornfield was expanding its access to city infrastructure, potentially creating networks of secure locations for operations beyond public scrutiny. "Sarah, this could be important," James said carefully. "Would you be willing to share the contract details discreetly?" Her hesitation was brief but noticeable. "This isn't just about finding Shadow, is it? You're investigating something bigger." James considered his response. Sarah deserved honesty, but full disclosure could put her at risk. "It's complicated. Shadow's condition wasn't an accident or neglect. It was systematic, and he's not the only victim." "You're building a case," she observed, the familiar insight that had made them good partners both personally and professionally surfacing despite their years apart. Just like the Hansen investigation. The reference wasn't coincidental. The Hansen case had involved high-level corruption that ultimately contributed to James's forced retirement when he refused to back down. "Similar stakes," he acknowledged, "possibly higher." "I'll send what I can," Sarah decided. Elena mentioned, "You're staying at the same apartment. Is that secure for receiving sensitive information?" The question revealed both her ongoing concern and her understanding of the situation's gravity. "I have alternate arrangements. I'll text you the details." After they disconnected, James sat in the storage unit, momentarily overwhelmed by the expanding scope of the investigation. What had begun as a personal mission to understand Shadow's suffering now potentially involved city government, medical facilities, and police departments across multiple jurisdictions. The pattern suggested something beyond simple profiteering from retired service animals, a broader infrastructure of concealed operations using legitimate security contracts as cover. The question was, cover for what? As night fully descended, James completed his preparations for the next day's surveillance operation. The scheduled K9 retirements provided an opportunity to document the connection between official programs and Thornfield's facility, potentially saving 3 dogs in the process. Yet, even as he focused on immediate objectives, James's mind kept returning to Sarah's information about the hospital contract. Thornfield was creating a network of secure, restricted locations throughout city infrastructure, locations that could potentially serve multiple purposes beyond their stated function. In the quiet of the storage unit, surrounded by equipment that represented both his past career and current mission, James allowed himself a moment of clarity. This investigation had evolved beyond seeking justice for Shadow. It now involved exposing a system that exploited public trust for private gain, using loyal service animals as its first expendable resources. The stakes were higher, the opposition more powerful, but the fundamental principle remained unchanged. Those who couldn't speak for themselves deserved advocates willing to face whatever consequences came with revealing uncomfortable truths. Tomorrow would bring risks, but also the first opportunity for concrete action beyond gathering information. 3 dogs scheduled for retirement processing represented 3 opportunities to intervene before they shared Shadow's fate, and to collect irrefutable evidence of the systematic betrayal taking place. With renewed determination, James completed his preparations, his mind focused on the rescue mission ahead, while remaining alert to the broader implications of what he had discovered. Shadow had survived against overwhelming odds. Others deserved the same chance, and those responsible for their suffering needed to face justice, regardless of how high the corruption reached. Dawn broke with a light drizzle that painted the city in muted greys and blues, providing ideal conditions for surveillance. James positioned himself strategically in a converted utility van he'd acquired from his storage unit, a vehicle outfitted with tinted windows and modest external markings, identifying it as belonging to a fictional maintenance company. The first scheduled K9 retirement pickup would occur at the Northeast Precinct at 9:30 a.m., where K9 Ranger would be transferred from his handler to Elite Transport Services. From his vantage point across from the precinct, James calibrated his equipment: long-range camera with enhanced zoom capability, directional microphone, and the surveillance drone ready for deployment if needed. A laptop displayed the schedule Mike had provided, complete with handler names and transport routes. At precisely 9:15, a white Elite transport van with official departmental authorization stickers pulled into the precinct's restricted parking area. 2 uniformed men emerged carrying specialized transport equipment. James activated his camera, documenting every movement as they entered the building. 20 minutes later, they reappeared with a 3rd individual, a uniformed officer whose body language conveyed reluctance and emotional strain. Behind them, secured in a transport crate, was a Belgian Malinois who maintained perfect discipline despite the obvious confusion of the situation. James zoomed in, capturing clear images of the documentation being signed, the exchange of the dog's service equipment, and most importantly, the Elite transport officer securing an official department tag that read, "Retirement Program Authorized. Transfer to the crate." The officer, Ranger's handler, knelt beside the crate for a final moment with his partner. Though James couldn't hear the exchange, the man's posture told a story of reluctant farewell. He reached through the grate to stroke the dog's head one final time before stepping back, visibly struggling to maintain professional composure. As the transport officers loaded the crate into their vehicle, James documented every detail: the Official department clearance codes displayed on their tablets, the vehicle identification numbers, the secured transport protocols being followed. Everything appeared completely legitimate and by the book. No handler would question their partner being taken by personnel following such meticulous procedures. Once the van departed, James followed at a discreet distance, maintaining visual contact while staying outside the range of any onboard security systems. The route initially followed the expected path toward the department's official retirement facility, a training center on the city's northern perimeter that allegedly prepared retired K-9s for civilian placement. However, at a particular intersection, the van deviated from the expected route, taking an industrial access road that led toward the warehouse district and the Thornfield facility James had infiltrated the previous day. James maintained surveillance, documenting the route change and the van's arrival at a secondary entrance to the Thornfield complex. Not the main delivery area he had observed before, but a specialized receiving dock with restricted access signage. The elite transport officers unloaded Ranger's crate and transferred him through a secure door, where they were met by facility personnel in elite K-9 Solutions uniforms. James captured clear images of this exchange, including the transfer, documentation being signed on both sides. Most significantly, one of the receiving personnel was Victor Mercer himself, the K-9 acquisition specialist whose name appeared on Shadow's replacement microchip. The evidence was unequivocal. Dogs surrendered through the official department. Retirement program were being directly delivered to Thornfield's facility without ever reaching the publicly claimed retirement center. James encrypted and backed up these images immediately, sending secure copies to both Mike and a cloud server accessible only through encrypted channels. The documentation created an irrefutable chain of custody from legitimate department procedures to Thornfield's shadowy operation. With the first transfer complete, James consulted the schedule for the next pickup, K-9 Cora, from the Southern District K-9 Training Center at 12:45 p.m. There was time to check on Shadow and confirm arrangements with Dr. Patel before continuing surveillance. At the veterinary clinic, James found Shadow significantly improved, alert enough to recognize him immediately and attempt to stand before being gently restrained by the technician. "He's responding remarkably well to treatment," Dr. Patel informed him. "His blood work is showing steady improvement and the infection is receding. We're still monitoring his kidney function carefully. The dehydration and malnutrition caused some damage, but I'm optimistic about full recovery." "What about the implant?" James asked. "I've consulted with a specialist who can remove it safely once Shadow is stronger," she assured him. "My colleagues at the Rural Veterinary Collective have confirmed they can accommodate up to 4 additional cases on short notice. They have appropriate security protocols and staff experienced with traumatized working dogs." James nodded gratefully. "I'm documenting the transport chain today. By this evening, we should know if interception is possible without compromising." Evidence collection. He spent 30 minutes with Shadow, noting with satisfaction how much more responsive his partner had become. Though still weak, Shadow's eyes tracked James's movements with the focused intelligence that had made him an exceptional working dog. When James performed subtle hand signals from their training days, Shadow's ears perked forward in recognition. His training and bond remained intact despite the trauma he had endured. "We're making progress, boy," James assured him quietly, "and we're not just fighting for you now." Back in the surveillance vehicle, James positioned himself near the Southern District K-9 Training Center well before the scheduled pickup time. This facility was newer, with enhanced security features including perimeter cameras and restricted access gates. James maintained a greater distance, relying on telephoto lenses and the surveillance drone for documentation. The elite transport van arrived precisely on schedule, following procedures identical to the morning pickup. This time, the K9 being transferred was a female German Shepherd named Cora, who showed obvious signs of recent injury. Her front leg was bandaged, and she moved with careful restraint when visible through the transport crate. James focused, his equipment on the documentation, capturing images of paperwork that classified Cora as medically retired, injury in service, with an official department veterinarian signature authorizing her transfer to the Rehabilitation and Placement Program. The handler in this case was a young woman who exhibited even more reluctance than Ranger's handler had shown. She engaged in extended conversation with the transport officers, repeatedly checking their credentials and authorization codes. James zoomed in on her name badge, Officer Teresa Mendez. Despite her evident concern, Officer Mendez eventually surrendered her partner to the transport team, though she photographed their credentials with her personal phone before allowing them to depart. A detail James noted with interest. Here was a handler whose instincts were triggering warning signals, even within the apparently legitimate process. As with the previous transfer, the elite transport van initially followed the route toward the official retirement facility before diverting toward the Thornfield complex. James documented this deviation and the subsequent delivery to the same restricted receiving area, where once again Victor Mercer supervised the intake. 2 of 3 transfers documented, with 1 remaining. K9 Axel from the Western Precinct at 3:30 p.m. This final pickup would complete the evidence chain establishing the systematic diversion of retiring police dogs from official programs to Thornfield's facility. As James repositioned his surveillance vehicle, his secure phone rang, Mike calling with urgency in his voice. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "Internal Affairs just issued an alert about unauthorized access to the K9 program database. They're reviewing security footage from all facilities, including the industrial complex." James processed this development quickly. "How long before they identify me?" "Hard to say. Your disguise was good, but facial recognition might flag. Similarities to your department records. 12 hours at most, probably less." The timeline had suddenly compressed dramatically. If Internal Affairs connected James to unauthorized facility access, not only would the investigation be compromised, but any evidence he'd gathered would be tainted by allegations of illegal collection methods. "I need to accelerate," James decided. "The 3rd pickup is our last chance to document the full pattern and potentially intervene." "Intervention wasn't the plan," Mike reminded him. "You were gathering evidence for a proper investigation." "The timeline's changed," James countered. "If they identify me, the whole operation gets buried. At minimum, I need to secure evidence of what happens to these dogs after intake, preferably while ensuring they don't share Shadow's fate." Mike's silence conveyed his concern. "What are you thinking?" "I'm going to complete surveillance on the 3rd pickup, then follow through to document the initial processing. If what I suspect is happening, the dogs are evaluated and categorized on arrival, just like Shadow was. That's the evidence we need to prove systematic abuse rather than isolated neglect. That's significantly more dangerous than external surveillance," Mike warned. "The facility has internal security you won't be able to evade for long." "I'm not planning on evading it indefinitely," James replied. "Just long enough to document the initial processing and, if possible, secure the dog's safety." After ending the call, James checked the facility schematics Mike had provided earlier. The receiving area connected to an intake processing center with veterinary equipment, likely where incoming dogs were evaluated and categorized according to the protocol document he'd photographed. If James could access that area during or immediately after the 3rd transfer, he could document critical evidence linking department retirements directly to Thornfield's exploitation system. The risk was substantial, but with Internal Affairs, Already tracing unauthorized access, the window for evidence collection was closing rapidly. The final scheduled pickup proceeded similarly to the previous two, with K9 Axel, a veteran German shepherd with distinguished service records, being transferred from his handler to Elite Transport Services under official protocols. James documented the process thoroughly, completing the evidence chain showing all three retiring K9s being diverted from the official retirement facility to Thornfield's complex. As the transport van departed with Axel, James implemented the next phase of his accelerated plan. Rather than continuing remote surveillance, he drove to a position near the Thornfield facility's perimeter, where an access point in the fence, noted during his earlier reconnaissance, would allow approach without triggering the main security systems. The maintenance schedule indicated security cameras in this sector would be running on backup systems during a scheduled power fluctuation test, creating a brief window where recorded footage would be of reduced quality. This overlap of vulnerabilities would provide James approximately 20 minutes to access the facility, document the intake process, and exit before full security protocols resumed. James prepared his equipment methodically, body camera discreetly integrated into his clothing, compact toolkit for navigating access barriers, and most importantly, the knowledge of Thornfield's operational protocols gleaned from Mike's intelligence and his own observations. The stakes had escalated beyond evidence collection to direct intervention, a significant risk, but one James deemed necessary given the compressed timeline and the immediate danger to three K9s who had served faithfully only to be betrayed by the systems meant to protect them. As he checked his equipment one final time, James reflected on the journey that had led him to this moment. Finding Shadow had awakened something he'd thought lost after his forced retirement, the unwavering commitment to justice that had defined his career as a detective. This mission had evolved from personal redemption to systemic exposure, with implications extending far beyond individual dogs to the integrity of institutions citizens trusted with their safety. Shadow had survived against overwhelming odds, maintaining his training, dignity, and capacity for trust, despite unconscionable betrayal. The least James could do was demonstrate similar resilience in the face of increasingly dangerous opposition. With determination hardened by righteous anger and precise focus honed by years of tactical operations, James moved toward the perimeter access point. The next hour would determine whether three more loyal service dogs would share Shadow's fate, and whether the system that betrayed them would finally face exposure and accountability. What had begun in a rain-soaked gas station parking lot with one emaciated dog now expanded to a confrontation with corruption that reached into the highest levels of city governance. James entered this arena not as a badge-carrying detective with institutional authority, but as something potentially more powerful, a witness determined to expose truth regardless of personal cost. The perimeter of the Thornfield facility presented fewer challenges than James had anticipated. The scheduled power fluctuation had created the expected security gaps, allowing him to navigate through the maintenance access point without triggering alerts. His security background and the intelligence Mike had provided gave him intimate knowledge of the blind spots in standard surveillance systems, knowledge he now leveraged to move undetected toward the intake area. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the complex as James approached the rear of the processing center. Employee vehicles filled a small parking area, including a familiar car that gave him momentary pause. A silver Audi with a distinctive Veterans Service emblem on its bumper. James had seen this vehicle before, but couldn't immediately place where. He accessed the building through a service entrance left propped open by maintenance staff, a common security vulnerability in even the most sophisticated facilities. Once inside, James navigated the utilitarian corridors with purposeful confidence, his generic maintenance uniform and clipboard providing visual legitimacy to any casual observer. The sound of dogs, controlled, disciplined barking that indicated working animals rather than random strays, guided him toward the intake area. As he approached, voices became audible, professional, clinical discussions about assessments, commercial potential, and behavioral baselines. James activated, his concealed body camera documenting everything as he moved closer. Through a partially open door, he observed a large processing room equipped with examination tables, specialized restraint systems, and diagnostic equipment. The 3 recently delivered K9s were secured in separate assessment areas, each attended by technicians in elite K9 Solutions uniforms. Victor Mercer moved between stations, clipboard in hand, directing the evaluation process. Full workup on Subject 117, Mercer instructed a technician examining Ranger. Category assessment pending behavioral response to disassociation protocols. The clinical terminology couldn't disguise the reality of what James was witnessing. Loyal police dogs being processed like commodities, their value assessed not by their service or capabilities, but by their potential for exploitation in Thornfield's secondary markets. As James documented the scene, movement at the far end of the corridor caught his attention. A woman in a lab coat emerged from an office, reviewing documents as she walked. When she looked up, recognition hit James like a physical blow. Dr. Rebecca Winters, former department veterinarian who had retired 3 years earlier. Around the same time, the K9 retirement program had been restructured. Dr. Winters had been respected throughout the department for her dedication to the K9 unit. She had treated Shadow multiple times after difficult operations, always showing exceptional care for the working dogs under her supervision. Her abrupt retirement had surprised many, explained only vaguely as pursuing private sector opportunities. Now those opportunities were clear. She had transitioned from caring for police dogs to facilitating their exploitation. The betrayal stung sharply, compounded by the realization that she had likely approved many K9 retirements knowing their actual destinations. James maintained his position, continuing to document as Dr. Winters joined Mercer in the processing room. Their conversation, captured by his directional microphone, revealed disturbing details about the operation's scope. The Berlin contract requires 5 fully trained narcotic detection dogs by end of month, Dr. Winters noted, reviewing Mercer's assessment forms. Subject 117 shows promising indicators for repurposing. What about the female? Subject 118 presents complications, Mercer replied, gesturing toward Cora. Recent injury limits immediate commercial applications, but her genetics are exceptional, breeding program potential with proper conditioning. And 119. Preliminary assessment suggests resistance to dissociation protocols. Recommend category C classification with accelerated processing. The casual discussion of these animals' futures, dogs who had served alongside officers, protecting communities and saving lives, ignited a cold fury in James. Accelerated processing was the same designation Shadow had received before being used as training bait for fighting dogs and ultimately abandoned. As he continued surveillance, a new figure entered the processing room. The distinguished older man James had encountered during his previous infiltration, Richard Thornfield himself, accompanied by another familiar face that sent a shock of recognition through James. Captain Edward Westfield, the administrative officer who had overseen James's forced retirement and denied his request to adopt Shadow, now stood beside Thornfield, surveying the operation with evident satisfaction. Processing on schedule? Thornfield inquired, his cultured voice carrying easily to James's position. All subjects received within parameters, Mercer confirmed. Initial assessments underway. Dr. Winters is evaluating commercial applications now. Westfield nodded approvingly. The department appreciation dinner is next week, Richard. The mayor specifically mentioned how pleased he is with the cost savings from the outsourced retirement program. Mutually beneficial arrangements usually generate satisfaction, Thornfield replied smoothly. Your department saves budget allocations for training replacements, and we maximize resource utilization across our various enterprises. The clinical euphemisms couldn't disguise the corruption on display. A police official directly collaborating with the private contractor exploiting retired service dogs for profit, with apparent political approval from the highest levels of city government. James continued recording, capturing irrefutable evidence of the connection between official department procedures and Thornfield's operation. However, documenting was no longer enough, not with the accelerated timeline and the immediate threat to the 3 K9s being processed before his eyes. Intervention had become necessary, but direct confrontation would compromise both the evidence and any chance of extracting the dogs safely. James needed a diversion that would create opportunity without revealing his presence prematurely. The maintenance uniform provided a solution. Moving with purposeful authority to a nearby utility panel, James implemented a calculated risk, triggering a localized electrical disruption that would activate emergency protocols without endangering the facility's occupants. Using his security background knowledge, he manipulated the circuit breakers in a specific sequence that would indicate system malfunction rather than deliberate tampering. Within moments, emergency lights activated as primary power to the processing. Wings shut down, automatic protocols shifting critical systems to backup power. The disruption achieved precisely what James had intended. Standardized safety procedures would require all personnel to verify secure containment of assets before addressing the technical malfunction. In the controlled chaos that followed, James maneuvered closer to the processing room, documenting the emergency response while preparing for extraction. As predicted, Thornfield and Westfield departed immediately, escorted by security personnel toward the administrative wing. Dr. Winters and several technicians moved to secure sensitive equipment, while Mercer remained to oversee the K9 containment. Secure all subjects in transport crates, Mercer ordered, his irritation evident. Move them to holding until systems verify. The technicians complied, transferring each dog to mobile transport units designed for easy movement between facility sections. James positioned himself in the utility corridor that connected to the secure holding area, calculating timing and approach as the processing room emptied. When the last technician departed toward the central control room to assist with systems verification, Mercer remained alone with the 3 crated K9s, checking their secure latching before he too would follow protocol and deliver them to holding. This momentary isolation provided the window James needed. Stepping into the processing room with the confidence of authorized personnel, he addressed Mercer directly. "Sir, emergency protocols require immediate transfer of these assets to secondary containment," James stated, clipboard raised authoritatively. "I'm here to expedite transportation." Mercer looked up, irritation evident. "That's not standard procedure. These subjects remain under my direct supervision until—" He stopped, mid-sentence, recognition slowly dawning as he studied James's face. "You're not maintenance. You're the inspection officer from yesterday." James maintained his composure, aware that his cover was deteriorating rapidly, but committed to the extraction plan. "These dogs are being processed illegally through falsified retirement protocols. I'm documenting departmental corruption and animal abuse under color of authority." Mercer's hand moved toward his radio, but James continued calmly. Before you call security, understand that everything happening in this facility has already been documented and transmitted to multiple secure locations. The evidence doesn't disappear if I do. This gave Mercer momentary pause, enough for James to press his advantage. You're the visible face of this operation, Mr. Mercer. When exposure comes, and it will come, you'll be the easiest one to sacrifice. Thornfield, Westfield, the politicians, they all have deniability. You don't. Uncertainty flickered across Mercer's features as he calculated his position. What do you want? Information in exchange for consideration, James offered. But knowing leverage when he saw it. These 3 dogs walk out with me now. In return, my documentation will reflect your cooperation as an informant rather than a primary facilitator. Impossible, Mercer scoffed, though with less conviction than his position might warrant. Security protocols are compromised by the current electrical malfunction, James finished for him. Loading Dock 7 has no camera coverage during backup power operations. These units can be transported through maintenance corridors without authorization verification under emergency protocols. You know it, I know it, and now we both know that the other knows it. The calculated assessment of facility vulnerabilities, information. Only someone with intimate knowledge of security systems would possess, visibly unsettled Mercer. His expression shifted from confrontational to calculating. I'm following orders, he said finally. I don't make policy. The Nuremberg defense didn't work there either, James replied evenly. You're implanting tracking devices, administering experimental compounds, and processing police dogs for fighting rings and overseas military contracts. That goes beyond following orders to active criminal facilitation. Something in James's detailed knowledge of the operation's specifics seemed to reach Mercer, cracking his professional facade. How did you... Shadow survived, James interrupted. K9 Officer Shadow, service number 5293, processed through your program 7 months ago, categorized as training resource, after showing resistance to reprogramming. He survived what you did to him and led me straight back to this operation. The specific details struck home, Mercer's expression revealing that James had correctly identified his direct involvement in Shadow's processing. That's impossible. That dog was dumped near your storage facility when he no longer served your purposes, James finished. Left to die after being used as bait for training fighting dogs. But he survived, Mr. Mercer, and now he's provided the evidence that will dismantle this entire operation unless you make a different choice right now. The emergency lights cast harsh shadows across Mercer's face as he visibly calculated his options. In the distance, facility alarms continued their rhythmic warning, marking the dwindling time before security protocols would normalize and opportunity would vanish. 3 dogs, Mercer said finally. Then what? Then you provide detailed testimony about this operation, names, contracts, procedures, destinations, everything you know about how retired police dogs are being processed through this system. They'll kill me, Mercer stated flatly. The department has witness protection capabilities, James countered, but that option only exists if you act now. The moment stretched between them, a contest of wills underscored by the facility alarms counting down their remaining window. Finally, Mercer reached a decision, his shoulders slumping slightly as self-preservation overcame loyalty to Thornfield's operation. Loading Dock 7, he confirmed, moving toward the transport crates. I'll help you move them, but after that, I need guarantees. You'll have them, James assured him, already mentally mapping their extraction route through the maintenance corridors. But understand this, if you're setting up an ambush, the evidence still goes public. The only variable is whether you go down as a cooperating witness or a primary perpetrator. Mercer's grim acknowledgement confirmed his understanding of the situation. Together, they began moving the transport units containing Ranger, Cora, and Axel toward the maintenance corridor. 3. Loyal service dogs unwittingly at the center of an operation that extended far beyond their individual fates. As they navigated the dimly lit service passages, James maintained constant vigilance, aware that Mercer's cooperation stemmed from self-interest rather than moral awakening. Yet the shifting alliance represented something significant. The first crack in Thornfield's carefully constructed system, a vulnerability created by one man's choice to save himself rather than protect corrupt masters. The loading dock appeared ahead, temporarily unmanned as personnel addressed the electrical malfunction. James's modified utility van waited just outside, positioned during his infiltration precisely for this extraction opportunity. What had begun as evidence collection had evolved into direct intervention, a higher-risk approach necessitated by the compressed timeline and the immediate danger to 3 K9s who deserved better than becoming subjects in Thornfield's exploitation machine. As they loaded the transport units into the van, Mercer glanced nervously toward the facility. "Security protocols will reset within minutes. You need to move now." "You're coming with us," James informed him. "Your testimony is essential to this case." Mercer's momentary hesitation suggested he'd been considering double-cross once the dogs were safely removed, but James's unwavering gaze communicated that partial cooperation wasn't an option. "Fine," Mercer conceded, climbing into the passenger seat as James secured the rear doors. As they drove away from the facility, emergency alarms still sounding behind them, James permitted himself a moment of grim satisfaction. 3 K9s rescued from Shadow's fate, a potential witness secured, and most importantly, irrefutable documentation of the connection between official department procedures and Thornfield's operation. The most dangerous phase of his investigation had yielded the most significant results, but also elevated the stakes dramatically. There would be no returning to normal life now. He had directly challenged powerful interests with extensive resources and political protection. The road ahead promised escalating confrontation with forces that had already demonstrated willingness to discard loyal service animals when convenient. Their response to human threats would undoubtedly prove even more ruthless. Yet as James glanced in the rearview mirror at the transport units containing 3 K9s who would now have a chance at genuine retirement rather than exploitation, he felt absolute certainty in his course. Some principles transcended personal safety, a truth Shadow had demonstrated through years of loyal service, and which James now honored through his own commitment to justice, regardless of cost. The evening shadows lengthened as James drove, cautiously through back roads, avoiding main thoroughfares where traffic cameras might capture the van's license plate. Beside him, Victor Mercer sat in tense silence, occasionally checking his phone before powering it off completely, a precaution against tracking that suggested intimate familiarity with surveillance techniques. "They'll notice I'm missing within the hour," Mercer finally said, breaking the silence. "Extraction protocols require all personnel to check in after facility disruptions." "Which is why we're not going where they'd expect," James replied, taking another calculated turn away. "From the city center, Dr. Patel has arranged secure transport to a rehabilitation facility outside department jurisdiction. We'll transfer the dogs there before handling your debrief." In the rear of the van, the 3 rescued K9s remained remarkably calm, despite the unusual circumstances. Their training had prepared them for transport under various conditions, though none could have anticipated this particular journey, from dedicated service to potential exploitation, and now to an uncertain future. James contacted Dr. Patel using the secure phone, confirming readiness for the rendezvous at an abandoned veterinary clinic on the city's outskirts, a location she occasionally used for treating wildlife that couldn't be brought to her main facility. The site offered privacy, basic medical equipment, and most importantly, no digital footprint that Thornfield's resources could trace. "I've arranged transport to the Rural Veterinary Collective," Dr. Patel informed him. "They'll have a vehicle waiting when we finish preliminary examinations. How are the dogs presenting?" "Stable but stressed," James reported, glancing back at the transport units. "No obvious immediate medical concerns, but they'll need full workups. I've also got an unexpected addition, a human witness who needs security arrangements." "Doctor." Patel's momentary silence conveyed her surprise, but her response remained professional. "I'll make the necessary adjustments. ETA? 30 minutes, assuming no complications." As James ended the call, Mercer shifted uncomfortably. "You're talking like you've done this before. Extractions, secure transport, witness handling." Former detective," James replied simply, "specialized in corruption investigations before my forced retirement." Recognition dawned in Mercer's expression. "Calloway, your detective James Calloway, the one who testified against his own department in the evidence tampering scandal." James didn't confirm or deny, focusing instead on the road ahead. His reputation within law enforcement circles remained controversial, hailed by some as courageous, condemned by others as disloyal. The case that had ended his career had involved senior officers falsifying evidence to secure convictions, a practice James had exposed despite tremendous pressure to remain silent. "That's why you were so intent on finding what happened to your dog," Mercer continued, filling the silence with his own deductions. "History repeating itself, system corruption, evidence manipulation, pressure to look the other way. The difference," James noted coldly, "is that last time the victims were people who could speak for themselves. This time the victims had no voice, except through those willing to listen." They arrived at the abandoned clinic without incident, Dr. Patel's nondescript sedan already parked by the rear entrance. She greeted them with efficient professionalism, immediately focusing on the transported K9s while casting curious glances at Mercer. "I'll need to examine each dog individually," she explained, leading them into the dusty but functional exam room. "We should prioritize based on any immediate concerns." James helped unload the transport units, positioning them in the makeshift treatment area. As each crate was opened, the dogs' reactions provided immediate insight into their conditions and training. Ranger, the Belgian Malinois from the morning's first transfer, emerged with cautious discipline, responding to basic commands despite the unfamiliar surroundings. His physical condition appeared excellent, though his behavior suggested the early stages of the dissociation protocols Mercer had mentioned. Subtle resistance to human connection beyond tactical obedience. Cora, the female German shepherd, moved with evident discomfort from her front leg injury, but her temperament remained remarkably balanced. She displayed no aggression despite her pain, her training holding firm even in these disorienting circumstances. Axel, the veteran German shepherd, showed the most concerning signs. His initial reluctance to exit the transport crate gave way to mechanical compliance, his eyes lacking the engaged intelligence typical of working dogs. James recognized the behavior from Shadow's early days after rescue, a withdrawal into automated responses as psychological protection against trauma. "They've already started the conditioning," Mercer explained, noting James's observations. "Standard procedure begins during initial department processing before official retirement. Medication adjustments, reduced handler contact, preparatory isolation, all designed to ease transition to our facility's protocols. The casual admission, delivered with the detachment of someone describing ordinary business procedures, reinforced the systematic nature of the program. This wasn't opportunistic exploitation, it was methodical repurposing of living beings, beginning while they were still under department care. Dr. Patel conducted preliminary examinations of each dog, documenting their conditions with the same meticulous attention she had given Shadow. No critical medical concerns, she concluded, but all three show signs of pharmaceutical intervention. Blood work will tell us more, but I'm seeing consistent patterns with what we found in Shadow, early stages of the same protocols. She turned her attention to Mercer, professional detachment giving way to barely contained anger. You were administering behavior modification compounds to active duty police dogs before their retirement was even processed. Mercer's expression remained neutral. Department veterinarians prescribed transition supplements as part of standard retirement preparation. Most handlers never questioned it, trusted the process. Dr. Winters, James deduced, remembering the former department veterinarian he'd observed at the facility. Mercer nodded. She developed the protocols, claimed it reduced retirement stress for working dogs. In reality, it began breaking handler bonds and increasing compliance for repurposing. The calculated betrayal of trust, exploiting handlers, concern for their partner's well-being to facilitate exploitation, added another layer to the operation's moral bankruptcy. James documented Mercer's statements, building the evidence record, while Dr. Patel completed her examinations. The transport to the rural collective will arrive within the hour, she informed them, administering counteractive supplements to each dog. These will help clear their systems of the compounds they've been given. The recovery process won't be immediate, but they haven't been exposed long enough for permanent effects. As they prepared the dogs for transport, James debriefed Mercer on the facility's operations, recording his testimony about procurement procedures, client networks, and the financial structures that facilitated the program. The picture that emerged was more extensive than even James had anticipated. It's not just retired police dogs, Mercer revealed. That's the most visible operation. But Thornfield has similar arrangements with military contractors, border security, even some private security companies. Any working dog that's deemed no longer optimally efficient becomes a potential resource for secondary markets. What kind of secondary market? James pressed, though he already suspected the answer. From Shadow's condition. Depends on the dog's evaluation category, Mercer explained with disturbing detachment. Category A dogs, youngest, best physical condition, most adaptable, go to private military contractors overseas. No US regulations, high profit margins. Category B go to specialized security operations, corporations, some foreign government installations. Category C are the training resources used to train fighting dogs or as practice subjects for developing new control techniques. And Category D? James asked, recalling the terminal protocol notation from the documents he'd photographed. Mercer's expression tightened slightly. Euthanasia. Dogs too damaged or resistant for repurposing, but not suitable for genuine retirement. Officially processed as humane retirement due to quality of life concerns. No one asks questions. The scope of the operation's cruelty was breathtaking, not isolated incidents of neglect, but industrialized exploitation of animals who had given years of loyal service. James continued documenting, each revelation strengthening his resolve to expose the entire system regardless of political protections. How many dogs go through this process annually? He asked. Across all partner agencies, over 200, Mercer replied. It's a multi-million-dollar operation disguised as cost-saving efficiency. Department budgets show savings from outsourced retirement programs. Thornfield shows legitimate security contracts and everyone with authority to question the arrangement benefits financially. Including Captain Westfield, James noted, recalling the administrative officer's presence at the facility. Westfield was the initial departmental contact, Mercer confirmed. He approached Thornfield 3 years ago with the proposal, presented it as resource optimization. Repurposing valuable assets, the department was essentially discarding through traditional retirement programs. The timeline aligned perfectly with James's forced retirement and the denial of his request to adopt Shadow. Westfield had likely already been implementing the program's early stages, ensuring no dogs with significant commercial potential were lost to personal adoption. A vehicle approached outside, the transport from the Rural Veterinary Collective. Arriving as scheduled, Dr. Patel verified their credentials before allowing them access to the clinic's rear entrance. 2 specialists in unmarked scrubs efficiently prepared the dogs for secure transport, their practiced movements suggesting extensive experience with traumatized working animals. "They'll be safe at the collective," Dr. Patel assured James. "The facility maintains complete confidentiality for all patients, with security protocols designed specifically for high-risk cases." "What about him?" one of the transport specialists asked, nodding toward Mercer. "I have arranged a secure location for witness debriefing," James replied. "Once the dogs are safely transported, we'll proceed separately." As the dogs were loaded into the specialized transport vehicle, James observed each one carefully. Despite the trauma of their near miss with exploitation, all 3 maintained the dignified bearing characteristic of their training. Like Shadow, they carried an innate resilience that transcended circumstance, a quality that made their betrayal by human systems all the more unconscionable. Ranger, sensing James's attention, briefly made eye contact, a moment of connection that conveyed more than words could express. In that silent exchange lay both acknowledgement of shared purpose and the unspoken promise that these dogs would not be forgotten or discarded again. Once the transport departed, James turned his attention to the next phase, securing Mercer's formal testimony in a documented deposition that could withstand legal challenges. The evidence accumulated thus far, surveillance footage, facility documentation, and preliminary witness statements, provided a compelling foundation. But Mercer's comprehensive testimony would transform individual evidence points into an irrefutable pattern of systematic abuse. "We move to the secondary location now," James informed him. "I have contacts arranging formal deposition with appropriate witness protection considerations." Mercer's composure finally showed cracks, the reality of his situation apparently sinking in. "Once I give official testimony, there's no going back. Thornfield's connections extend throughout the region. Political protection, law enforcement cooperation, financial resources. They don't forgive betrayal. Neither do the dogs who served faithfully only to be exploited and discarded," James replied, without sympathy. "The difference is, you chose your role in this operation. They never had a choice." The harsh assessment landed as intended, Mercer's expression reflecting dawning recognition of his position in this moral equation, not just a cog in a machine, following orders, but an active participant in systematic cruelty against beings who had given everything in service. As they prepared to depart, James received an urgent message from Mike, a warning that rippled through his carefully constructed operation. "Internal alert issued. All retirement transports suspended. Westfield conducting personal audit of K9. Program records. Proceed with extreme caution." The acceleration of departmental response confirmed James's assessment. The extraction of 3 K9s and the disappearance of a key operational manager had triggered emergency protocols. Thornfield and his allies would mobilize every resource to contain the breach, protect their operation, and eliminate threats. The mission had evolved beyond documentation or individual rescue to systematic exposure. with 3 living witnesses, to the exploitation program, now safe at the Rural Collective, Shadow recovering under Dr. Patel's care, and Mercer prepared to provide insider testimony, James had assembled the components necessary to bring down the entire operation. But with powerful interests now aware of the threat, the final phase would require perfect execution against adversaries with institutional resources, political protection, and the desperate motivation of those facing exposure of criminal enterprise. As darkness settled fully over the city, James secured Mercer in the van and charted their route to the deposition location, a private security firm owned by a former internal affairs investigator who had left the department after the evidence. Tampering scandal? One of the few officials who had publicly supported James's testimony. The current victims had been secured, their immediate safety assured. Now began the most dangerous phase, confronting the system that had betrayed them and ensuring such betrayal could never happen again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.